Me to myself. But guys, what if I put Stain in S tier?
This is gonna start a huge drama.
Welcome my friends to another Alliteration Gaming video. My name is Levi and today I'm bringing in another tier list video for you guys. Yes, the almighty tier list. It has been quite a while since we did one of these. A lot has changed. We've had some new characters enter the fray. We've had some cards get banned and there have been a lot of results and just chain reactions from all that type of stuff that has shaken up the meta quite a lot. And even though we haven't actually had a new set release since our last video, I think the tier list looks substantially different than it did, especially in the higher tiers of play. Things have gotten shaken up quite a bit. The first thing I want to clarify is these are of course just my opinions, man. This is just what I think. I play this game quite a lot. I have some accolades here and there. These are just going to be my opinions. They by no means dictate what you should or shouldn't or can or cannot play in a competitive environment. Play what you want, what you feel comfortable with, what you think you will do well with, or what you think you'll have fun with, whatever your prerogative is. Do not let me dictate or offend that in any way whatsoever. Let's go over our different tiers because I kind of have them broken up into little categories here. The S tier, simply put, is going to be the top dogs. These I think are the bread-winning characters of the format. These are the ones that I am not surprised to see win events, that I absolutely expect to see at least one if not multiple of in top cuts, and characters that probably at the end of the day might need to get looked at a bit as far as balance is concerned. Next we have the A tier, which is where most of our really strong decks are going to go. These are the decks I consider strong and highly competitive. I will not be surprised to see them win things, and I expect to see at least a handful of them across the top cuts. I expect the top cuts to be made up mostly of S and A tier characters. Next we've got the B tier. These are characters that are not bad by any means, not even average. These are good, solid, strong characters. They're maybe just a bit more fair than others and are just lacking that little bit of oomph to really sneak up into the A tier, but I can still see all of them topping. If they won, I'd be a bit surprised, but at the end of the day, I think that with enough elbow grease and dedication, a lot of these B tier characters could get there. Now going into the C tier, these are the average and moderate characters. These are characters that are just okay. They're not bad, but they're not really good either. They kind of just, they have a thing they do and they're pretty good at it, but at the end of the day, you as a pilot are going to have to carry a lot of weight when you're playing these characters, and there are probably just characters in these tiers above them that do what they do just in a better and or more efficient kind of way, but from a pure competitive stance they probably don't cut it. The last tier, the D tier, these are just the straight up underwhelming characters. I don't want to call them bad because I feel like it's really hard to classify a character as bad in this game simply because of how like skill dependent the game as a whole is, but these are characters that just have game plans that are, they either just don't execute very well, or they're just not good game plans in the first place, or they're just not characters that I feel like there's any direct reason to play. They just leave a lot to be desired on all fronts. And then the last footnote is the tiers themselves will be kind of ordered, not necessarily in a direct like best to worst kind of way, but more of like a top half of A tier, bottom half of A tier, top half of B, bottom half of B, that kind of idea essentially. You know, not like a straight up one for one across the board, but kind of a general idea of if they're a little more, you know, if they're on the better or the worst side of the tier, but not necessarily in the one above or below it. With that all being said, guys, let's just hop right into it. First off, we have Minetta 1. I'm going to put him somewhere in the bottom half of C tier. I think this character is okay. He's got a good gimmick and he's pretty good at doing it. It just kind of isn't very powerful in a lot of ways. Next, we have the new queen of the meta. I'm bringing Momo up from an A tier placement in our last video up to the S tier. I think the banning of stuff like Froglash and Amphibious really brought down the hyper aggro decks and is leaving room for a character like Momo to really shine, and I dare say even be overpowered in this new meta. Momo herself is really dictating a much slower meta that we exist in right now, and it's really just a result of a lot of the changes that have come through, and people just realizing that like a lot of the very generic good stuff life decks that people were playing on Toga, you can play as Momo and it just kind of have the built-in defense of things like release and wall clean to get perfect blocks on your character. You can destroy anything from -2 speed, and you can remove to find any weapon that you need to block with to have the right zone. It just kind of puts a lot more power in your hand and also makes you a lot less vulnerable to those hyper aggro decks finding lethal on turn 2 or something like that, simply because you didn't draw your good defensive foundation pieces enough, because they're all just built straight into your character. The defense on Momo's face is so strong, and now that she has really good aggro cards like Cannon Blast, and set 2 brought so many good tools to her like Small and Limber, she has has a lot more ways to flex her aggro now as well, and really find her way rising up the ranks to what I consider to be an S tier character. Next we have Nomu. He's probably gonna be somewhere in the bottom half of C tier as well. I think the character is just okay. I think as we move into this much slower format, decks are getting a lot more defensive. It's just hard for Nomu to find a lot of stead as a 5 hand size aggro character. A lot of the decks that are good right now are very efficient at blocking, and he struggles to find leverage there. Next we have Ochako 1. I'm gonna put her somewhere in the upper echelon of A tier. I think she's still really powerful. A lot of the air decks definitely took quite a hit from the loss of Unwavering Slash, Amphibious, and Frog Lashing. A lot of the air decks had kind of evolved to playing an Unwavering Slash and Stadium Engine. They don't really have access to that anymore, nor do they have much access to Stadium as a card, really, because it's hard to play without an Unwavering. It's very taxing, but I still think a lot of these air decks are super strong, and Ochako also has the benefit of having the life symbol as well, which is one of the strongest symbols in the game right now, so she still has good builds across the board, and is still just an insanely powerful character card. Next we have Todoroki 1, probably somewhere in the upper half of C tier. I think this character is really okay. He's kind of found a little bit of new ground, I think, in this slower meta, but I still just don't think that his game plan is really worth dedicating itself to, and he kind of leaves a lot to be desired on those fronts, but he is a pretty handy character, and I could see him getting there with a good pilot. Next we have Ida 1. I'm going to put Ida 1, I think, somewhere here in the bottom half of B tier. I think this character has found a lot of new legs in this slower format, and has really kind of solidified a role as like a very decent rogue control deck, and actually a pretty good sideboard option for some decks as well. You know, his symbols only got stronger in set 2, and I think he has some really polarizing matchups that he can wriggle his way into with things like taking the first enhance and using stuff like Fulfilled My Duties and other defensive tricks like that, and also just being a fantastic poke character. In a very similar vein, I'm going to put Shigaraki 1 up here as well, probably over Ida, probably somewhere in the bottom half of B tier. I think this character also has a lot of new legs in this slower, more drawn out format. He, as a defensive, grindy foundation resource control and poke character, can find a lot more leverage in something like that when he's not just getting like blown out on turn 2 by a lot of these crazy aggro decks. I think his more methodical play style is a lot better than this day and age. Next, we have Osui 1. Oh, how the mighty have fallen, but no, not really. I think this character is still super powerful. Still gonna put her way up here in the top half of A tier, even though she lost Frog Lashing, even though she lost Amphibious. The character card is still so strong. You just never ever have progressive. She still has a crazy attack pool, and really I think all the most damage that losing those 2 cards did was hurt her like super turbo, like, you know, first turn kill life builds. Now she kind of just solidifies back into her more slower, grindier water builds and things like that. Still an extremely powerful character that still carries that potential to sometimes blow you out on turn 2. I don't think Osui is really going anywhere, if I'm being honest with you guys. Next we have Aoyama 1. He's going to be our first D tier character. I think this character is just very underwhelming. He's just kind of a stats machine, but he's a 6 hand size character, and he needs a lot of resources to really get his good turns going. I think him with things like Cannon Blast and stuff is fun, but I don't think it's worth dedicating to, nor is it nearly as good as a lot of the characters who want to do a very similar thing. Continuing on with our D tier characters, I'm going to put All Might True Form down here as well. I don't think this character is very good. His game plan is not very solid. It's very vulnerable and weak to a lot of silver bullets and stuff like that in the game. And at the end of the day, you have to see such key pieces, and you're just paying a lot for not really any real benefit. In a similar vein, I'm going to put All Might 1 up here as well. This character definitely has like some cool new tricks and builds with stuff like Earth and new training method and turboing your foundation base and your hand and your resources, and then doing things like Howitzer, Impact, Cyclone, and there's definitely some cool stuff going on with the character, but I still think it's extremely vulnerable to a lot of things in the game, and it's just a very all-in and risky game plan for not a very consistent payoff. Moving way up, we have Conray Woods. I'm going to put him somewhere in probably the upper half of A tier. I think this character is very strong. He's kind of solidified himself as like the real defensive air deck in the game right now, and still has really strong builds on earth and water as well. The character is just solid all around, and he's also probably the air character that got hurt the least out of the bans, because he could play Unwavering Stadium, but he wasn't very reliant on it, and he very rarely did things like Amphibious at least under the air symbol for sure. So I think Kamui is still really good in this format, especially as things get slower and slower. Next we have All Might 1. I think this character is still very powerful. Probably gonna put him somewhere right here maybe. He's so strong. The A tier is gonna be really tight, guys, but I think this guy is still insane. He's still just an 8 hand size 30 health character that puts free stats on everything. The Punch Planet package only got stronger in set 2. He's got a lot of new cool toys to play with, as well as like some deadlock threats as well and things like Taiyaki. I think he's still just a very powerful character that deserves all the respect that you have to give him. Plays the long game really well, especially into a lot of these higher tier characters. Next we have Oduro. I think Oduro is just a very average C tier character. You know, he's able to put a lot of damage on the punches, but a lot of other characters can just do that more efficiently, and he just doesn't really offer any distinct relevance in the metagame. There's not really any characters that are super reliant on their foundation base that are like really panicking about having to flip all their stuff. Then we have Mezzo Shogi. I think Shogi is pretty solid actually. I'd probably put him somewhere in the upper half of C tier. He's got 2 really good symbols on all and life. Life is just so strong right now, and he can fish out important key pieces to your game plans and just play a really good stuff life deck. He just doesn't really do it any better than a lot of the other life characters do, so he's just gonna sit kind of down here in the average tier. Next we have Mina 1. I feel similarly about her. I'd probably put her somewhere in the upper half of C tier. Again, she can play some really good stuff value decks on all 3 of her symbols, quite honestly. She has consistent healing. Honestly, the only thing that really holds her back is that the ceiling on her turns is very variance reliant. You know, when you check attacks that you don't really want to see at the time being and stuff like that, her value really starts to kind of downplay itself. And once again, a lot of other decks just play the same good value packages better. Mount Lady, I think, is a very underwhelming character. I don't think she's very good. She's very slow to get going and to get set up. And at the end of the day, even once you do get set up, a lot of other characters can put out similar amounts of damage at much earlier times without needing to work so hard to find everything. All Might 2, on the other hand, is a very strong character. I would probably put him somewhere around here. He's absolutely A tier. I think he's still really strong all around. His throw build, especially as like, you know, the 4 face shield, 4 wall cling life decks are starting to fall off a little bit as people gravitate towards other things. His throw build can be even stronger right now, or you can just play him on very generic good punch packages. Basically the same build as All Might 3, just on different ultimatums and with the ability to draw a lot more cards. He has really good builds on fire and all. He's got awesome ranged fury builds. Character has a lot going for him, and I think he's still such a powerful force in the metagame. Next up we have Ochako 2. She's going to sit somewhere down here in the bottom half of A tier, I think. Still a very strong character. I don't feel as highly about her as I do these, but I think she's still got a lot of things going for her. Just opening up with, like, you know, your 8-speed gale forces and just going crazy if you find all that stuff super quick. She's one of those characters that can bust through any wall before the wall deck can even have a chance to set it up, and that's always going to be a really powerful force. Next we have Ida 2. I think Ida 2 is fine. Sits somewhere down here in the bottom half of C tier, I think. He's an okay character. He's still an okay choice, and you can execute some solid game plans with him. Next we have Osui 2. I think this character is really bad. I think her whole game plan just contradicts itself, and you're just trying to be a 6 hand size aggro character that doesn't really have any way to fuel her own abilities, nor are they even that effective when they actually go off. Next we got Denki. I think Denki is really good. I put Denki up here in like the upper B tier. I feel very good about Denki. I think he's still really strong. Again, he got hurt by losing the whole stadium unwavering / engine, but I think he's still a very potent character, especially against a lot of these 7 hand size characters that want to be defensive. He's really good into, because he has a chance to just blow them up before they can even find any defensive ground. And as we see a lot more decks that are much more reliant on their stage, him being able to commit down key pieces for free as he just pokes is really strong. Next up we have Kurogiri. I'd probably put him somewhere in like the middle of B tier. I think he's a pretty solid character. I think he's a little bit better as like a silver bullet sideboard options against decks that are really reliant on like stuff that passes stats, or things that are really big difficulty attacks that are tough to replay when you bounce them, messing up combos, messing up double jab pummels and things like that. I think he has really good space against those characters, against those 5 hand size aggro characters he's really good against. As his own deck, I don't feel as strongly, but I think he's certainly something you could good play. He has really cool builds with stuff like Searing Glacial Storm to lock down their board and other neat tricks like that. Next we have Midnight. I think Midnight is a pretty okay character. Probably put her somewhere in like the middle of C tier. Pretty average. You know, has some really cool aggressive builds. Chaos is probably her coolest symbol right now. Got a lot of new support. Until she gets all of her crazy Heroes Clash cards, I think she sits somewhere in the middle of C tier. Next we have Present Mike 1. I think this character is pretty bad. I don't think this guy is very good at all. I don't think that mill is really a super optimal strategy right now. I think we're just getting into more and more decks, more and more defensive decks playing these really big card counts. And I don't really think there's any place for a strategy like that right now. As just a generic stat pumping character, I think there's much better ways you can do that. Next we have Sato. I think Sato is pretty solid. I'd probably put him like somewhere in the bottom half of B tier. I think he's pretty okay at what he does. The main issue with this character is Fourth Kind just kind of came in and took his whole game plan and does it a lot more lethal, but I think Sato is still an okay character in his own right. I think he's an okay side if you just like are in a matchup where you're like, I really don't want to be a 5-hand size character in this situation. He has some potential there in all of his order decks, and at the end of the day still has 3 really strong symbols on him that he can play with. Next is Toru. I'd probably put Toru somewhere in like the upper part of C tier. I think this character is very okay as her own deck. As a sideboard option, I think she's very strong, and until the end of time I think you will see her in most air and water decks when you just need to either like stall out a game, or you're just in a matchup where you have really good interactions flashing your opponent's moves, decks that are very enhanced step reliant and things like that. Next is Gran Torino. I think this guy is okay. Probably put him like somewhere around here. Very average character. I think he has some really cool tricks. You know, he didn't get hurt as much by the air restrictions. He kind of played more of his own cards anyway and did his own thing, and he does it fairly okay. I think the main issue right now is there's so much draw power in the meta that his discarding the rivals cards is just very hard to find a lot of value in when so many decks can replenish their hand size very easily. Next we have Midoriya 2. I'd probably put Midoriya 2 somewhere in the bottom half of B tier. I think this character is actually pretty good right now. His foundation ramp, his build, is really insane if your checks are right and your deck is constructed right, and he can find a lot of really favorable game state to put himself in. I still think that All Might 3 just kind of does it all better. Like, they're locked into the same packages, but All Might 3 is just it's just automatic, right? Like the extra cards are just on your face, whereas Midoriya has to find them through his checks, which sometimes doesn't get you there. He's still a pretty solid contender, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him make a top cut one of these days. Next, we have Bakugou 2. I think Bakugou 2 is a really solid character. I think as the throw decks have kind of leaned off a little, he can find a little more success playing on the symbols he wants to be on, with even without any throw hate, as a 7-hand size character, and he can really perform some crazy aggressive turns that can blow through some crazy big walls and just find yourself a lot of resources in the process, flipping their key pieces along the way as well. I think he's a very solid character. Next we have Hatsume Mei. This character like really took the meta by storm in Vegas and then just completely fell off. I think the main issue with her is she has really polarizing matchups into the Earth decks that are playing learning the standards right now, like Kiroshima 2 and Cementos, and she just doesn't really have an out to those decks, flipping her box full of babies, and it really just destroys her character. I think she's an okay side option into some of those longer game matchups, but I probably have to put her somewhere in like B tier now, just because of how hard it is to play her into some of those really popular decks right now. It's just not as much of an option. If that wasn't a factor, I'd probably put her somewhere in the bottom of A tier, because I think she's a strong character in her own right. She just doesn't have an answer to those silver bullets until Heroes Clash comes out and she gets her new cards. Next we have Mina 2. I think this character is okay. I'd probably put her somewhere in the bottom half of C tier. I think she's very average. She has a really niche, cute game plan, and when she finds the right card, she can execute it pretty well and do some really cool things, but it's very restrictive on finding things like her ultra rare and her foundations to set your turns up to actually find any real value in her really specific playstyle. Next we have Kiroshima 1. Once again, how the mighty have fallen and haven't really gotten any better. I'd probably put Kiroshima 1 somewhere down here. Character is very underwhelming. He's still extremely heavily nerfed. The erratas were very hard on him. He lost his best card, had to, but you know, still a really big hit to the character, and I don't think that he's really going to be seeing any success anytime soon, unfortunately. He had his time in the limelight and it's now over. Next we have Ochako 3. I think this character is actually pretty solid. She has very 6 hand size aggro energy, but with the ability to find a lot more cards and punish blocks and like stack her checks and stuff like that. When she finds a grip of moves, she can really go in on you, and has still really good symbols to play under. I just don't think she's as efficient at it as some of the other really aggro air decks like Ochako or Jiro or something like that. Next is Todoroki 2. This guy is the king of B tier. I think this character is so solid. I think he just needs a couple things to really get there. I'm so close to putting him in A tier, but I think he sits very comfortably up here. He's a really solid character, just does very good stuff. He's never really going to throw you for a loop or surprise you, but he has a game plan. It's a solid one, and he always executes it. Next, we have my king, my legend, my hero, Stain. I think Stain sits somewhere down here in like the really low B tier. If it wasn't me, he'd probably go in C tier, but I'm biased. I love this character so much, and I think when he gets to do his thing, he's super cool. But in the grand scheme of things, he's not very efficient at doing it. He can be a vanilla character a lot of the time against some of the better decks in the format, and it's just really hard for him to actually put pressure on with his character abilities. Next, we have Dobby. I think Dobby is okay. Probably put him somewhere around here. He puts some pretty cool stats on things, has some nice applications. The once per game, it's very vulnerable, but if they don't have an answer to it, it is very strong. The issue is most of the good decks right now can definitely pack answers to it, and so it kind of just makes you a pretty vanilla character overall. But he's got really strong symbols, and like at the end of the day, throwing just like 8 damage meteor showers one after the other is pretty cool. Next, we have Bad Dad, Mr. Endeavor. I'd probably put him somewhere in the lower B tier. I think his character is okay. He's pretty solid. Again, he's got a very consistent game plan that he's very good at executing all the time. He just wants to put a bunch of big damage on things. He's basically just like a 6 hand size Nomu, but he's got a lot of tricks that can recur his attacks and find more things like that, including his response on his face as well. So I don't think he's too bad. I feel a little bit more better about him as a very honest 6 hand size aggressive character that wants to play a bit of a slower game. Next we have Tokoyami 2. This character card is really bad. He does almost nothing. He has like no good cards to interact with him. He can put summon Dark Shadows in the card pool, and that is basically it. He doesn't really have any powerful ally foundations that he can do like broken, like commit, do a good thing, ready it, commit on the next one, do a good thing again. He just doesn't have the tools to make this character very good whatsoever. Next is Sero 2. I think Sero 2 is actually a really solid character. Probably sits somewhere in the upper half of C tier for me. I think he's pretty good at what he does. He has a very cool and interesting game plan. If he had more ways to just kind of like ramp into it and really find his place as like a foundation control deck that punishes you for blocking, I think he could have a really cool place in the meta, but he's just a little bit underpowered in that game plan, so he's going to sit somewhere down here in the C tier. Hey you like the My Hero Academia collectible card game, right? If the answer is at least a resounding probably, you should head right on over to unfunstuff.com for all of your MHA CCG purchasing needs. We've got the new set Heroes Clash on pre-order, as well as the new DLC 2 in stock. And if you want to use coupon code Wealthy Aspirations, you can get 5% off your entire freaking order, and also support old Levi a little bit along the way. The link for all this is going to be right down in the description below, so get on over there and go get yourself some amazing product from some amazing people. Back to the video. Next we have Toga the Queen. The Queen, she was packing an S tier spot last time, but I think like Osui, I have to move her down somewhere into the A tier. I think she's still really good. The primary issue that I have with her is that basically her exact build just kind of got hijacked by Momo, and Momo just plays it a little better, but you can still play it under Toga, and it's really solid. In those matchups where you're a little less worried about decks aggroing you out super fast, you don't necessarily need to have all of those answers on your face like Momo. You can find time to look for your releases and your rescue completeds and your wall clings and your faith shields and, you know, all of those defensive pieces that Toga doesn't have on her face, but as a 7 hand size character that filters things can very easily look for. It's just hard to compete with Momo essentially being a 7 hand size character that doesn't filter but instead just goes and finds what you need, right? Next is Shinso, another very underwhelming character. Gonna sit way down here for me. I don't think this guy does much at all. His abilities do a mediocre effect sometimes, and then sometimes just do almost nothing, which is just not really enough to be a worthwhile character. He's just a very, very, very underpowered card. Next is Shiozaki. I actually think Shiozaki is a pretty solid character. I'm gonna put her somewhere in like the upper half of B tier. She's kind of like an alternate version of, she's kind of like a water Togoyami, if that makes sense. You know, a lot of passing of stats, a lot of stat buffs in general, a lot of being able to cheat cards out for free. Just doesn't have access to as much consistent aggressive tools as Tokoyami does, especially under the fire symbol, but can also play a much more long game defensive oriented game plan under the water symbol. So very cool character. I like Shiozaki a lot personally. Next we've got my main man, Eraserhead. I think this character is really good, but from a competitive standpoint, I think it's really hard to stomach taking him to an event and playing him for like 8 hours, because you have to just kind of play this character perfectly. I think he and Momo are the hardest decks to play in the game, but Momo is all about memorizing like patterns and combos and sequencing, whereas Eraserhead is more of just like constantly having to make life or death decisions every single turn in, turn out, game in, game out. And if you do that perfectly for an entire day, you'll probably win the event, but that is really tough to do, and it's very daunting, and you can achieve similar results on a lot of other characters for a lot less effort. But if we're ranking him just based on pure power level, I think he sits somewhere amongst these guys in like the middle of the A tier. Next we have Minetta 2, who I actually think is a pretty strong character right now. I'd probably put him somewhere here in like the lower half of A tier. I think he's really good. He's one of those characters that I think people just kind of stop playing for no real reason, especially as we're going kind of back into a slower meta now. I think Minetta 2 is really good right now. I think people are sleeping on him, and I wouldn't be surprised to see a resurgence of him soon. Next we've got Monima. I think this guy is super fine. Probably put him somewhere around here. He's much more of a better sideboard character than anything. As his own deck, if you build it really masterfully, there's a lot of cool applications and things you can do. Main issue with this guy is kind of like Stain. He's got to hit your rival before they can do anything, and a lot of decks right now in these upper tiers are very defensive focused and won't let you do that for a little while, and you're just going to be a vanilla 6 hand size character for a while. He is a great sideboard option against a lot of these 5 hand size characters that you're worried about going up against. Copy their game plan, but with 6 cards, beautiful. Present Mike 2, I think this character is really bad. Again, his game plan is just not that great. Everyone's playing big decks right now, and I think the stat rewards for milling them simply isn't worth it. Next we have Ida 3. I actually think Ida 3 is a pretty good character. I'm going to put him somewhere up here in like the upper half of the B tier with a lot of these guys. I think he is a strong 7 hand size aggro character that can play defense really well because of how efficient he plays his foundations, and just can find his really key kick pieces to set up his momentum and orchestrate his kill turns really efficiently. Tetsu. I would probably put him somewhere around here in like the lower half of B tier. I think this guy is quite good, all things considered. I think he's a lot better than people give him credit for. No one really plays him, to be honest, and I don't know why. I think he's got a lot of cool applications. He's like a 5 hand size character, but like as long as you can find a move, he's not really a 5 hand size character. He has a lot of draw power on his symbols, on his foundations, his attacks, a lot of ways to find more cards, and put out some pretty crazy strings, just being able to slap 4 damage onto anything whenever you need it. It's really powerful. Next we have Ingenium. I think this guy is somewhere up here in the C tier. I think he's just a very okay character. Just he puts really good stat bonuses on things. He puts really good stat penalties on things and can just pump things up and be a very efficient character. And next up we got Big Daddy himself, Mr. Fourth Kind. I think this guy is still crazy. I think he's fallen off a little bit from like the oppressive S tier status I really considered him at back in the day. I think Momo really wrecks this guy, but I think he still belongs somewhere up here in like the upper A tier. I think this guy is still really good. He can just really slam down a lot of these defensive characters before they get a chance to set up, and under the order symbol he has so much card draw that he doesn't necessarily need to play such like a all-in, like I'll kill you all on turn 2 or I'll just lose all my gas. Like, he's not nearly as like polarizing as that. He can play long games, he can still recur attack just with his blocks. Like, he's still a really efficient character in a lot of ways, and I think has a lot going for him as a 5 hand size character up here. Really powerful. He just struggles against Momo because even when her board is completely put down, she can build in things from her card pool at ready and also just put minus speed on everything. He can't cheat out those huge 1.3 millions and stuff like that as easily against her. Next we got Ectoplasm. I think this guy is a pretty mediocre character. Gonna put him somewhere down here in the D tier. I just don't think he does very much. He doesn't have any ways to actually find his character cards. You have to just build them all in. Hope you don't check them. Hope you find your attack to put them back in the deck, and hope you draw them again, and then build them in all as your 6 hand size character. It's kind of a lot more trouble than it's worth, although he does have cool applications to pick up copies of his attacks on some of his symbols, but not enough for me to feel really comfortable putting the character any higher than this. Next we have Cementos. I think Cementos is really good right now. Actually, I'm gonna put him like somewhere up here in the B tier. I think the character is super solid, especially as we're playing a much slower game. I think that Cementos is really good into this meta. I think he has a lot of solid applications, and we've definitely seen him popping up here and there. I think he's strong right now, and I think a lot of decks struggle to kill him before he enters his preferred game state, and or struggle to play in that game state with him, where he can eventually just become like a 10 hand size character and just wreck you through sheer advantage and sheer numbers. Snipe, I think Snipe is actually pretty good. I think I put Snipe like somewhere up here in the B tier. I think Snipe is pretty cool. He's got a lot of really gnarly tricks. I think burn damage is really strong in this meta, especially as decks are trying to turtle out a lot more. And he's got a lot of really cool defensive tricks under all of his symbols, and access to a lot of healing on the death symbol as a 7 hand size character, which I think is just very potent. The Menace, it's time to talk about the Menace, the bird. The bird is the word, Mr. Tokoyami. I think I still have to put this guy in S tier. I think this character is absolutely bonkers. I think Tokoyami is still so insane. He's still really highly represented. In the most recent provisional, there were 3 in the top cuts alone. I think you can't be a bad Tokoyami player and run into a lot of these more defensive decks, especially stuff like Momo, but you still just have so much potential to just blow them out before they get a chance to do anything. And he's honestly really consistent at it still, and is still gonna pub stomp so many other characters just because of how much high intensity, uninteractable aggro he can put out at such an early stage of the game. It's just always going to be so good, and I think this character is still extremely potent. Next we got Gunhead. I think this guy is pretty bad. Probably gonna put him somewhere up here in the D tier. He definitely has a game plan. I don't think it's a very good one. Putting speed on your throws is like kind of negligent. Being able to cycle them is okay, but honestly, there's still a lot of throw hate in the meta right now, and I don't think your character relying on them is a really solid game plan, especially when you just do it a lot worse than a lot of other decks do. Next we got Selkie. I think Selkie is okay. Probably put him somewhere in like the C tier. I think he's a very average character. You know, he has some really cool utility pieces. He's got a cool game plan, but he kind of feels like Mina too a lot. Where he really needs to find specific cards and specific pieces to execute a solid turn. He just doesn't really have the right support to do that very consistently yet, but I would keep an eye out on him. I think he's a powerful character that could see some application if he gets some nice cards that work with him. Next we got Oobami, who I feel very similarly about. Probably put her like somewhere down here in the lower half of C tier. I think she's actually a pretty okay character. I think just her only real application is playing good stuff life, and at the end of the day, there are characters that do that way better and way less gimmicky, and that's not really a strength of the character on her own. It's more a strength of the life symbol as a whole, and so I think she's gonna sit somewhere down here for me. Next we got the boy Hantasero. I actually think this guy is really good. I feel very similar about him. Like these 4 characters right here, I feel very similarly about. These guys are so close to being an A tier. I think they're all so good in general, even better as we move into a bit of a slower format. And Sero is just so good. Sero is so good at disrupting your opponent's plays, forcing them to play their really analytical, methodical deck completely different than they want to, or you just get to be an absolute monster of a character. And all these defensive 7 hand size characters, you can just, if you just find all your tape swings and all your throws and stuff, which like when you draw so many cards you will, it's gonna be really tough as you overload your zones and just like slowly sculpt your guaranteed damage to an easy victory. I think the one issue I have with Sarah right now is he's got a very polarized matchup into All Might 3, because he can half block you and say, hey, draw 2 cards, I dare you. Pass with like 4 or 5 6 in hand, and then he just like demolishes you. But still a very strong character, and the great thing about that matchup is that on his 3 symbols, he has fantastic sideboard character options to escape stuff like that, which is really nice for him. Midoriya 1, oh poor little Midoriya 1, probably gonna sit somewhere up here in the D tier for me. I think he's at least a little better than a lot of these guys, but at the end of the day, his abilities just aren't very impactful. They're very, very flavorful. He's a very, very proper thematically designed card, but I don't think his game plan is good into anything. Like, he's so bad into Momo, he's so bad into Kiroshima too. A lot of the good decks, it's just really, he struggles to find ground against, really. Next we got Bakugou 1. I think Bakugou 1 is okay. Probably put him somewhere down here in the C tier. I think he's just a very, very solid character. He just wants to go all in, and as a 6 hand size character, it's a bit harder to do that, and he's really, really hard for him to pivot towards other playstyles when he needs to do so if the game is not necessarily going his way. He definitely can find ground in some of the more cheeky double front beatdown decks, as long as you just like never check your ones. And I've seen cool stuff with like the Relentless Barrage Bakugou decks as well. He definitely has some cool gimmicky stuff, but it gets stopped and distracted really, really easily by a lot of the things in the format right now. Jiro, I think I'm gonna put right here next to Osui. Jiro is still an absolute powerhouse, even through losing Unwavering, even through losing Lash and Amphibious. If you ran those, this character is still just so extremely powerful and puts out so much aggro. She definitely was feeling over the top. If I was to make a pre-ban list tier list, she would have been an S tier with the Unwavering Stadium engine and all of that nonsense. I think that engine was just crazy in so many of these air characters. It would have put Denki in A tier for me personally. Like, it was just so nuts. But even without it, I think Jiro is still crazy. She's still really, really strong on air. The good symbol Staff Strike Jiros have been finding their way back into the format as well, as things kind of slow down a little. I think that no matter how you're playing this character, she is just very strong. And then last but not least, we have the DLC 2 characters to go over, making their way into the fray. Denki 2 is, I think, a pretty solid character. I would put him somewhere down here in the B tier, I think. I think this guy is very okay. He's got a lot of really, really, really cool tricks. His Chaos builds and his Order builds are super cool. Being able to cheat all of those really, really, really cool cards. Stuff like Slashing Whirlwind, Cool Student, Meteor Showers, Cheerful Uppercuts, and then responding with Rockin' Attitude. He's got so many really cool defensive plays, and just kind of sitting there and being a momentum generator for all of those abilities that cost momentum that aren't EX and powerful. I think he's a really, really, really neat character that can definitely find wins pretty easily. And then we have big boy Kiroshima 2. Kiroshima 2 I think I'm going to put right behind Ochako in here. I think his representation speaks more to his power level than his actual power level does. I think he shows up in numbers like an SS plus tier character, but in reality I think he's just a really strong A tier character. He's very, very solid. He's very, very honest, except when he's not and just finds a billion attacks and can play them all, because he just resets all his foundations constantly and it's all punches, so everything gets so big. And the characters that are really good against him I think are a bit lower down here in the tiers, that are really, really good at blocking his moves in succession, whereas some of these other characters are just going to struggle to protect themselves from his damage, and then just being immune to any of the big bombs like the Cannon Blasts, the Dark Shadow Ruins, anything big at the end of Jiro's strings, the Home Run Comets. Like, he just, like, built-in half damage rounded down on your character is just so powerful, and is nigh uninteractable with a lot of the scenarios that it finds the most value in. Very, very strong character. Momo 2, I think Momo 2 is pretty okay. She's probably going to sit somewhere down here in the B tier for me. Lower half of B tier, I think she's very solid. She is just a 7-hand size character that can play all 3 of her symbols really efficiently. Water doesn't really do a whole lot right now because you have like almost no weapons, but once the set 3 stuff comes out, she's going to be really good on that front. But I think her good and life builds are really good as well. Again, just finding a lot of leeway as a solid 7-hand size character that can play very, very good stuff, value symbol decks, is just enough to at least put her in the lower half of B tier. Lastly, and almost least, we have Ayama 2. I think this character is really underwhelming. He's only gonna make it into C tier for me personally because he's like a 7-hand size character. If he wasn't, he'd probably sit somewhere in the upper half of D tier. I think he's just okay. I don't want to pay health on my 20 health character, and only being able to really make mid moves threatening is just like really, really, really underwhelming. I have to applaud the flavor though, because all of his attacks are mid because they come from his mid section, his naval laser tummy, which I love the commitment there on that design. And so that is the entirety of my Crimson Rampage 2.0 post ban and restriction list tier list. I feel really good about the placement of all of these characters. I think the meta is really healthy and really diverse right now. I could see any of the characters in S and A tier winning. I could see any of the characters in B tier topping, and there's even some characters in C tier that I think a really dedicated pilot could squeeze a top out of. I think the game is in a pretty good state right now. I think we're just in a much more defensive game state, and some people like that, some people aren't. But again, same goes from when we were in the previous meta, which was much more aggressively focused and aggressively slanted. Those are all my thoughts, guys. I'm not going to ramble anymore. This video is super duper long because I wanted it to be very in-depth. And if you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much. I really appreciate you watching this whole thing. And if you really liked it and you aren't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and subscribe, man. We've got a lot more cool MHA CCG content down the grapevine as always. This is definitely one of the bigger uploads, but we've got so much awesome stuff planned in the near future, and I'd love for you to join me on that ride. That's all the time I've got today, and I'm going to see y'all in the next video, hopefully. This has been Levi with Alliteration Gaming, signing off.